lies on the attack, saying her brand of anti-immigration and critics say racist nationalism will make France great again. The presidential elections here take place in two stages. The first vote on Sunday, the next 2 weeks after that. Pollsters say that it is likely Le Pen will advance to the second round, but that she may not have enough support nationwide to ultimately become France's next president. Dara, back to you.
Richard Engel reporting for us from Paris. Thank you, Richard. Well, the first 100 days, a former key member of President Obama's cabinet grades President Trump. You might be surprised by what he said.
You're watching MSNBC International. People are talking about why Rachel matters to America.
That covers a lot of territory. Believe me.
Back to Washington now, where President Trump is gearing up for an important milestone, marking his first 100 days in office. Let's bring in NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, good morning to you. How is the White House framing this occasion?
Well, good morning, Dara. They are both drawing attention to the 100-day mark and at the same time trying to downplay its overall significance. It is an arbitrary date. It doesn't carry any particular importance except for the bit of history. It's one way to look at how has a new presidency begun. Now, for President Trump, who likes to talk about winning, there's a real push going on here to identify tangible victories it can associate with this 100-day mark. But at the same time, we've seen there has been no typical honeymoon for President Trump, with easy legislative victories to start off his presidency.
Rarely does the president simply walk to an event with no motorcade, but his first visit to the Treasury Department next door to the White House made that easy. While there, the president teed up an unexpected new headline for next week.
We'll be having a big announcement on Wednesday having to do with tax reform.
The president described his tax cut proposal in an interview with the Associated Press as bigger, I believe, than any tax cut ever. The president's plate is full, closing in on the 100-day mark next Saturday. With no legislative achievements yet, the White House is reviving an effort to repeal Obamacare when Congress returns this week.
It's going to be great. Well, it'll happen.
You're going to do health care and tax reform?
It'll happen. We'll see what happens. No particular rush, but we'll see what happens.
White House sources acknowledge that a second attempt at repeal is still a tall order, given lingering differences among House Republicans. The president brushed off expectations about meeting the symbolic 100-day deadline.
No, doesn't matter if it's next week. Next week doesn't matter.
But the calendar does count to avoid a government shutdown. The Trump team is also negotiating a sweeping spending package that would beef up defense and fund a border wall. Despite the president's tough stand on immigration, he told the Associated Press that undocumented minors, known as dreamers, who fear deportation, can rest easy. He says his administration is not after the dreamers, we are after the criminals. After a tour of the border near El Paso, Attorney General Jeff Sessions answered critics who called him dismissive when he referred to the Hawaii-based federal judge who blocked the immigration travel ban as being from an island in the Pacific.
I wasn't diminishing the judge or the island of Hawaii, that beautiful place. Give me a break. I was just making the point there's a very real one judge out of 700 has stopped the President of the United States from doing what he believes is necessary.
And so what we expect coming up this week is a flurry of activity where the White House will talk about promises kept by the president, many of those through executive actions or proposals the president wants to see go forward, still needing Congress's help. And it'll be difficult to try to do more than one thing in the upcoming week for Congress just because of the scope of what we're talking about. Attempting another repeal, getting a funding package to keep the government open. Those are big ticket items that are critical for the Trump presidency, and he'll need a partner in Congress, and we've seen how that hasn't always been so easy in the early days of this Trump administration. Dara?
Kelly, you're certainly facing a busy week ahead. Kelly O'Donnell in Washington, thanks so much. Well, in jail, accused of abducting his teenage student, what a teacher told authorities the moment he was arrested, and what the condition home safe with her family this morning after being kidnapped by her former teacher for a month. The family of Elizabeth Thomas says they are thankful the incident is over. The teenager was found in a rural cabin in Northern California Thursday. With her was her 50-year-old former middle school teacher, Tad Cummins. NBC's Maya Rodriguez joins us from Nashville. And Maya, good morning to you. What charges does the teacher face now?
Well, at this point, Dara, he is in federal custody. He will have an arraignment on Monday. For now, though, Elizabeth Thomas is here in Tennessee, back home safe with her family. They say she's being treated for the emotional distress she went through during her nearly 6 weeks on the run. In the meantime, we're also learning more about her dramatic rescue and her alleged captor's state of mind.
Tactical teams arrived in the pre-dawn hours to this remote cabin in the Northern California woods, then waited until Tad Cummins walked outside to make the arrest.
He was laughing. He was, I'm going to be very cooperative with you, whatever you guys need. I'm here to help you. And he pulled me aside at one point and made a statement that he was glad that this was all over. 15-year-old
Elizabeth Thomas found safe. Police recovering 2 loaded handguns and maps from a suspect on the run, 39 days.
Someone showed me a picture because, I was telling him, I was like, that's the guy.
The cabin caretaker, Griffin Barry, called in the tip to police, realizing the 50-year-old was a fugitive a few days into their stay.
He said they were from Colorado, and he said he had a house fire.
With Cummins facing several federal charges, including kidnapping and taking a minor across state lines to have sex, Thomas's parents are grateful.
I'm just so overjoyed to have her home, that she's safe.
As investigators build their case, they say the teacher groomed and manipulated the student. New court documents contend before the pair vanished, Cummins left his wife a note saying he left to clear his head. He filled a prescription for Cialis and took out a loan for $4,500. Caught on surveillance at Walmart 2 days after the alleged kidnapping, police say they stayed at cheap motels with 1 bed. Today, Elizabeth Thomas is back in Tennessee. Her family says she is comfortable and resting, but has suffered severe emotional trauma.
She has to go back home and face the reality of school, family, friends. It's probably going to be difficult for her.
Now, Tad Cummins again remains in federal custody. He is set to be arraigned on Monday. And Dara, that's when we expect to learn more about those particular charges he might be facing.
Maya Rodriguez, thank you so much. And it's such good news that she's home safe. Thank you, Maya. Once again, saying all options are on the table when it comes to North Korea, what Vice President Mike Pence said in Australia this morning that is key to solving tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Welcome back. I'm Dara Brown here at MSNBC World Headquarters in New York. Approaching the half hour, here's what we're monitoring. Happening now. Severe weather across the country. Heavy rain flooded parts of Oklahoma and Texas. The system now moving east today with threats of damaging winds and possible tornadoes in the deep south and Tennessee Valley. And in Florida, thousands of homes have been evacuated as more than 90 separate wildfires are burning. This is video from 2 fires raging in Polk County. That's between Tampa and Orlando. Officials say some structures have already burned. We turn now to the latest threats from North Korea and a new warning from the Trump administration. Here's Vice President Mike Pence in Sydney, Australia, during a joint press conference with Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, praising China for its efforts to pressure North Korea.
They've already taken steps which we greatly welcome, intervening in coal shipments and intervening in commercial travel. But we believe China can do more. We're encouraged by the steps that China has taken thus far. That being said, we also wanted to make it clear that all options are on the table.
NBC's Kelly Kobiea is in Seoul, South Korea. And Kelly, thanks for being here. How seriously is the U.S. taking these new threats by North Korea?
Well, when it comes to North Korea's words, their threats, the U.S., frankly, has said they don't take them very seriously. The Secretary of Defense saying yesterday that North Korea never really lives up to its word when it comes to these threats, never follows through. That said, there is a lot of concern surrounding this potentially 6th
nuclear test that everybody is keeping their eyes on. U.S. officials, in fact, telling NBC News that they're watching the nuclear test site, that they saw no notable movement or signs of an imminent test this morning. But those same officials tell NBC News that North Korea could conduct a nuclear test or a missile test really at any time with very little warning. They say that the North Koreans may be using solid-fueled missiles, which makes it much more difficult to detect a missile test launch in advance. Now, all of this comes amid a context of military exercises in South Korea. South Korea's military on alert as well. The USS Carl Vinson due to arrive in a couple of days, according to the vice president. And also some very interesting video coming out of North Korea today. Pictures of drivers lining up at gas stations waiting for fuel. There is some rationing, apparently, of fuel in North Korea right now, and some price spikes as well. Now, China is the main supplier of fuel to North Korea, but it's not yet clear whether this is a result of China restricting supplies of gas to North Korea. Also today, yet another threat from North Korea, the country promising a great war of justice if provoked. Dara?
Kelly Cobier with an update on North Korea. Thanks so much, Kelly. Turning now to the nation's capital, where today is Earth Day, and activists are gathering for the March for Science. The main event in Washington is one of more than 600 marches being held throughout the country and the world to raise awareness of scientific causes. And here in the U.S., a fight against proposed budget cuts by the Trump administration. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Bill Foster, who's heading to the march right after our interview. He is a scientist who serves on the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, as well as the Financial Services Committee. Welcome. Congressman Foster, what was the tipping point which led organizers to put this march together?
Well, scientists have been getting more and more upset about politicians standing up and saying things that they know are not true. If you stand up, if you're a scientist and you stand up and say something that you know is false, it is a career-ending move. And more in politics, we're seeing people stand up and say things and actually not have their career hurt in any way. We're also seeing huge threats to the science enterprise by the proposed budget cuts of the Trump administration. So both of those things have got scientists on high edge.
Congressman, what are the biggest truths that are being untold, and who's saying it?
Well, you know, there are examples of this that have been going on long before the Trump administration took over. A recent example of this in Congress is that the Republicans set up a select committee to set up the rationale for defunding Planned Parenthood. And one of the statements they made in their report was that in 100 years of research, fetal tissue has not resulted in any cures or any treatments for any diseases, which will come as a surprise for those who suffer from rheumatoid arthritis or cystic fibrosis or hemophilia or other diseases whose research and cures have depended completely on fetal tissue research.
And just another question about the Trump administration's proposed budget cuts here, because they're cutting to agencies like the EPA, and that's what's driving today's march. So what else are scientists like yourself trying to bring attention to?
Well, it's not just the EPA. I think the the proposal is to cut it by 30%. The DOE Office of Science is facing about a 20% cut, in large part for green energy research. NASA Earth Science is being cut significantly. And, of course, the National Institute of Health is facing, I think, an 18% cut in their budget proposal. And that is something where there is bipartisan outrage over that. Because, you know, it turns out that Republicans as well as Democrats get cancer.
And along with these cuts to the EPA and the other organizations, there are also jobs that are being cut, which is going to be an interesting way to see how they balance that out. I want to go to your op-ed piece, because you wrote that marching as a scientist. I want to get your sense on what you're hearing in the halls of Congress. Are there any glimmers of hope that there will be a turning point when some of your colleagues will actually take heed to the warnings by scientists?
Well, I think it's going to happen on an issue-by-issue basis. As I mentioned, I think that the cuts to the National Institute of Health will not stand. I mean, we're at just a golden age for biological research, and what this means is drug development. We're going to be seeing miraculous cures for cancers that used to be a death sentence. And so this is something that's known to members on both sides of the aisle. I think it's going to be a tougher slog on things like climate change, and because, frankly, the fossil fuel industry really has a big part of Congress by the throat.
And, Congressman, is there one issue that you in particular would like to highlight that your constituents are very concerned about?
Well, if you think about the long-term budget situation in our country, which is very serious, the two big drivers of that, well, the single big driver of that is health care costs. And the two big drivers of that are diabetes and Alzheimer's. Almost everyone knows someone whose lives have been touched by one of those two diseases, and they together are going to account for more than half of all our health care spending by the time the boomers reach retirement age. And so if we can come up with a low-cost cure for that through federally funded research, it will save really the long-term fiscal situation in our country and allow us to provide a dignified retirement for all Americans.
Definitely things to march for and to fight for. Congressman, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Well, the first 100 days, a former key member of President Obama's cabinet grades President Trump. You might be surprised by what he said. At next hour, new reaction from one of the key figures in the FBI's investigation into possible links between the Trump administration and Russia. What he's saying about another report on his alleged.
I think generally with regards to at least foreign affairs up to this point, he probably gets a B. With regards to domestic affairs, the failure of the Affordable Care Act, a lot of the inability to try to get things done within the Congress, some of his executive orders that have run into barriers with the courts, I think he probably is getting a D. So at this point, I'd say probably a C is what this administration is entitled to.
Former Defense Secretary and Clinton Chief of Staff Leon Panetta offering a not-so-great evaluation of President Trump's first 100 days in office. The milestone is still a week away, but the president is already on the defensive, tweeting, "No matter how much I accomplished during the ridiculous standard of the first 100 days, and it has been a lot, media will kill." Let's bring in Rick Tyler, MSNBC political analyst and former national spokesman for Ted Cruz, Joe Watkins, Republican strategist and former White House aide to President George H.W. Bush, and Zerlina Maxwell, director of progressive programming at SiriusXM and former director of progressive media for the Clinton campaign. Great to have you three here this morning.
Morning,
Good morning. Zerlina, I want to ask you first, because the president, does he have a point here? Is this ridiculous or unfair to judge any first-term president on just 3 months in office?
Well, we've been doing this since FDR, so it's interesting that President Trump now has a problem with it. Is certainly because he was so confident that he would be winning all the time, and we're going to win so much when he's president that we're going to get sick of winning. It turns out that after just under 100 days, it'll be 100 on next Saturday, he doesn't really have any legislative accomplishments to point to say, look what we've done in the first 100 days, look how I kept all my promises. In fact, fact checks that looked at his promises, campaign promises, are saying that he's actually broken 5, and many of them, 60 or so, he hasn't even begun working on. So he has a lot of work to do in terms of getting away from tweeting ridiculous things that distract us all from the real issues and actually getting to a legislative agenda. But that's always going to be trouble for him because he's a political novice. And I think that's what you're seeing here in this first 100 days in the lack of real legislative accomplishments.
And we just heard Leon Panetta saying that he basically got a C grade between the B and the D. Rick, what do you think? Do you agree with that grade?
Yeah, I think Leon Panetta is exactly right. It's nice to see America engage in the world. I think we need to do that. He also opened up the 2 significant pipelines. So energy policy has been very good, but as Zerlina pointed out, in legislative accomplishments, no, he hasn't gotten anything major done.
Joe, I want to ask you, the president's first 100 days could close with a government shutdown. So if Congress can't agree on a budget by Friday, how damaging is this going to be for him?
Well, that would hurt him. Clearly, if that happened, if the government shut down because they couldn't come to an agreement next week, that would really hurt him. I think the government doesn't shut down. I think they won't have a budget deal, but clearly they'll probably extend the current continuing resolution. So I think they'll be okay. But he's got a lot of work to do. The presidency and running the country is a lot harder than anybody can imagine. I think Donald Trump is finding that out.
And how much scrambling is he going to have to do to make this happen?
Well, he's going to have to work hard, I think, to make sure that members of Congress know what his agenda is going forward. One of the smartest things that I heard in my meetings this week on Capitol Hill is that he's looking to beef up his legislative team at the White House with Democrats. And that's actually a smart move. It's maybe a counterintuitive move, but it's a very smart move because it gives him the possibility of being able to accomplish some things legislatively with help from Democrats.
And Zerlina, it looks like the holdup with the budget, with the proposed border, would be the proposed border wall. And as Joe was saying, if he could get the Democrats on side, because for that it would take 8 Democrats to get that funding to go through the Senate. Do you think it could happen?
No, I don't think so. I think that the problem right now for the Trump administration is that the things that they want to do are very extreme, and so there's very little room for compromising when you're coming to the table as a Democrat. We're not going to dismantle our signature piece of legislation in terms of Obamacare. We are not going to help you fund a border wall that will essentially create more death along the American border and more chaos in that particular region of the country and damage and separate families, right? As Democrats, we don't want to put walls up in between families, which is what this border wall would do. So we're not going to pay for it. Plus, he said Mexico is going to pay for it. So again, I think there is very little room for compromise when you're coming to the table with such an extreme position, and Democrats there's just nothing to point to that we're going to agree with.
Let's turn to health care, because House Republicans are expected to release a new version of this health care bill, and it could be as soon as today. Rick, the last time they couldn't even whip up enough votes to pass it, they had to pull it, and that was embarrassing enough, so why try again?
Well, because Trump wants a legislative accomplishment in the first 100 days. I think that's what this is all about. Unfortunately, I just don't see how they're going to move a bill which is essentially the same, and they said it's essentially the same. It's got some new things in it, new provisions that both the Freedom Caucus Light and the moderates like. But remember, that bill that they produced had 17% public support. And until you can get public support over 50%, I think it's just very difficult to move major pieces of legislation.
You just mentioned his public support here. Do you think that the president is being assessed fairly? 60 things Zerlina said couldn't be done. So, I mean, they're not done. So how does he stand up?
Yeah, I was mentioning the public support for the health care reform bill, but you bring up a good point, and that is when presidents have large-scale support and people find them trustworthy, when they speak about, their vision for the country or moving legislation, people will listen and they'll put pressure on the Congress to pass it. That's really how large-scale reform gets passed. None of that's going on. I would say that I have to rate the communications coming out of the White House to the American people really is almost a failure, and that's why things are not getting done.
And Joe, what's your take on that? Do you think that he's being assessed fairly, or do you think maybe there were too many expectations?
No, I agree with Rick and also with Zerlina. I mean, I think that Leon Panetta's judgment of him or grading of him is pretty fair. I think he's being assessed pretty fairly. It's hard to run the country. You've got to be careful about what you say and how you say it. I'm not sure that the tweeting is helping him. Even Trump supporters are saying that they wish that he would tweet a whole lot less and govern a whole lot more. So I'm agreeing with the assessment right now. I think that this has been a tough first 100 days. He's got some distance to travel. I think he can succeed in some of his things, but there are some measures like the border wall, as Lena said, that are going to be really, really hard if he ties it to his budget, are going to be really, really hard to get done.
And let's talk about that being really difficult, because Zerlina, you mentioned the 60 items that he hasn't done yet in 100 days. Do you think maybe it was too much? Is it really difficult to do 60 items in 100 days? Are you holding him to a higher standard?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that we're just going based on what President Trump said during the campaign, which is we're going to win so much when I'm president, you're going to get sick of winning. Now, we're waiting for the winning to start, but it hasn't happened. What we've seen, though, is plenty of distractions, more information coming out about the campaign's possible possible ties to Russia, which hacked the Hillary Clinton campaign, as you know, and also tweeting. So there's been a lot to look at that distracts from the real issues. I don't think we're holding him to a higher standard. I think we're holding him to the same standard that we have all presidents since FDR, including President Obama. And it turns out that talking trash on Twitter about what President Obama should be doing or is not doing is a lot easier than actually being president yourself.
Well, and as you mentioned, there are a lot of things said in the campaign that don't necessarily translate to once you get into office. So we're going to continue our conversation. Zerlina, Rick, Joe, stay with me because I want to get your thoughts on Fox News dropping Bill O'Reilly and whether it opens the door for a new voice to take over. We'll be right back.
Men, hit on me. I don't care. But there's a way that it can be done where there's a very racialistic tone.
That's Prakita Burgess, a former temp worker at Fox News and one of at least 3 new women accusing host Bill O'Reilly of sexual harassment. O'Reilly has denied all the claims, calling them, quote, completely unfounded, but has agreed to leave the network. Let's bring back our panel, Rick Tyler, Joe Watkins, and Zerlina Maxwell. So, Zerlina, let's talk about O'Reilly's lawyer saying that these allegations are part of a, quote, smear campaign from the far left. How do you respond to that? And is the left happy that O'Reilly's off the air?
Of course we're happy he's off the air because I think that, he put a lot of toxic energy and words into the world that have damaging consequences. I think it's interesting that, as Larry would say, it's a left-wing smear campaign when Fox News itself paid out millions of dollars as a result of these allegations. What I will say is that I think that there's a two-prong issue here. One, we have the economic pressure that the public put on the advertisers to withdraw from O'Reilly's program, and that is really what caused Fox News to make this decision. But the public pressure is there because I think we have made a lot of progress in terms of the cultural movement to essentially educate people about sexual harassment, about sexual assault, about unwanted advances, and really consent. Donald Trump did a lot to educate America about what consent was because he did not have it when he allegedly touched women without their permission. So I think that we've come a long way, and Fox News' decision this week was a good one.
Rick, Bill O'Reilly's been a big player in the GOP talk world, so what happens now? Could we see a possible realignment of power, maybe someone behind somebody else?
I don't think so. I mean, look, Bill's opinion, Bill wasn't really a conservative. In many ways, he was a contrarian. Obviously, he was very good at what he did. He attracted millions of viewers. Fox has already redone their lineup. But I think Stephanie Ruhle has this right. I think this is more about the Murdoch sons who are now running News Corp, getting Bill out of the way because they're trying to acquire Sky News and they really don't need this distraction.
But let's talk about that because there was a big gap in time. Joe, were you surprised by how swiftly this seemed to have happened, or possibly why it didn't happen earlier?
Well, these things take time, of course, and I think this is a decision that the Murdoch sons had to make, and I agree with what Rick is saying. I mean, they've got other future acquisitions that they've got to consider. But the good thing for Fox is that they're considering the fact that we're in the 21st century, and in a perfect world, you're supposed to treat people the way you want to be treated, and so you just can't turn a blind eye to sexual harassment or even to the claims of sexual harassment. You've got to do the right thing by people, and I think that this move at least shows that they're making an effort to do the right thing by human beings, by women.
And Zerlina, do you think that O'Reilly was given too much credit for his influence by both the left and the right?
No, I think that he has a considerable amount of influence. That is true because when you look at the fact that these allegations were always circulating, it's not like these are new allegations or that we didn't know about previous allegations which were on tape. In terms of O'Reilly's influence, it's clear that he has a very large influence. His audience went up during the time of these allegations being back in the news. So I don't think it was overplayed. What I do think is that, as Joe said, we're in the 21st century, and so we have to treat everyone, no matter their gender, like they're full human beings, deserving of bodily autonomy and equal rights. That's the, mission of feminists like myself, and so I think that we're just moving forward and we're progressing in a direction in which we are not going to treat women or anyone like they are not human any longer.
So, Dara, I think we should, Joe and I might agree that the next conservative voice we'd like to see rise right here in MSNBC. How about that?
That sounds good. But, Rick, I want to ask you real quick, because do you think this is less about the corporate environment and just more about the fact that the advertisers left en masse?
Look, Fox had a problem. It started with Roger Ailes on down, and they didn't clean it up. They didn't fix it. And you know, so they are definitely going through a shakeup. It clearly cost them money. It may cost them viewers. That remains to be seen. But you know, it's processed out now, and we'll see what happens. Again, this is my network, so I'm loyal to this network. I don't want to criticize everybody else's network. I hope conservative voices actually can rise on MSNBC.
Well, time will tell. Rick, Tyler, Joe Watkins, Erlina Maxwell, always great to have you here. Thanks for a great morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for me this hour. I'm Darryl Brown. Thanks for watching. In the next hour, taking an interest in the French presidential election this weekend, we'll play you the actual phone conversation former President Barack Obama had with the country's progressive candidate and the crucial tip.
8 a.m. in the east, 5 a.m. out west, and it's day 93 of the Trump administration, and with only 1 week left, the president is downplaying that 100-day benchmark, calling it a ridiculous standard. But at the same time, the president making a new promise.
We'll be having a big announcement on Wednesday having to do with tax reform.
Jumpstarting talk of tax cuts and another swing at a health care plan. What does he hope gets done by day 100? Plus, a new report claiming Russia tried to infiltrate the Trump campaign through at least one of his advisors. We've got details about this latest twist and the moments of terror. Fear in the heart of Paris this week, all caught on tape, with new information about the attacker this morning and how it all might affect that big French election coming up tomorrow. And the last days of Bill O'Reilly, new reports on how the cable network he helped to build pulled the plug on his show, and whether new allegations could be surfacing against him soon. We do want to begin with new reaction from Vice President Mike Pence, just a day after President Trump promised a big announcement on tax reform coming up next week. Here's the Vice President making comments in Australia this morning.
Our corporate tax rate today is one of the highest in the developed world, and it's 5% higher than the tax rate here in Australia. President Trump's tax plan will slash the corporate rate and reform the tax code to make it simpler, flatter, and fairer.
But Congress is coming back from recess with a looming government shutdown and a new attempt by Republicans to repeal and replace Obamacare. President Trump is spending a working weekend at the White House, where he's touting the so-called Buy American, Hire American executive order he signed earlier this week. And here's part of what he said in his weekly address.
I took historic action to ensure that federal projects are made with American goods and to keep American workers and companies from being cheated out of contracts by countries that break the rules and break every regulation in the book to take advantage of the United States. That's not going to happen anymore. I also took action to reform our immigration system so that it puts the needs of American workers first.
Also new today, more about the vice president and his visit to Australia, delivering some tough talk about North Korea. In a news conference this morning, the vice president, Mike Pence, called on China to rein in the threat of North Korea by vowing that the U.S. will take action if necessary.
The president and I have great confidence that China will properly deal with Korea. But as President Trump made clear just a few short days ago, if China is unable to deal with North Korea, the United States and our allies will.
I want to go to NBC's Sarah James in Melbourne for us this morning. And Sarah, what else did the vice president have to say? We're from tax reform to North Korea.
Yes, he had a lot to talk about. He met with business leaders. He talked about prosperity in the region. But as you mentioned, military and North Korea front and center. The vice president saying this is a very serious time, that the United States is re-engaging with allies to reaffirm alliances. And one of those key alliances is Australia. He had a news conference with the Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. And Turnbull talked about the fact that there's a real mateship between the United States and Australia. This country has been side by side with the United States in every conflict since World War I. The vice president said that they are committed, the United States is committed to a Korean peninsula that is free of nuclear weapons and that every option is on the table. He reaffirmed the Trump administration's position that the era of strategic patience is at an end. I should point out there's about 1,250 U.S. Marines from Camp Pendleton in the north of this country. They're going to be doing maneuvers with Australian soldiers for about the next 6 months. And of course, the USS Carl Vinson is on its way to the Korean area.
Beginning of this administration, there were reports of a very terse phone call that happened from the Oval Office to the Prime Minister of Australia. Let's talk more about that and the diplomatic relations taking place now, especially in concern with the refugee agreement made by the Obama administration. I know that came up with these current talks with the Prime Minister there.
It sure did. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of interest in that here in Australia. People were really miffed that the United States president had given a dressing down to the Australian prime minister, something that made the talk shows, that made the evening comedy shows, calling it a dumb deal and really giving the Australian prime minister a hard time. Now, this was a much more conciliatory Vice President Pence today, talking about the strength of the alliance between the United States and Australia and basically saying that deal is going to go through. Here's what he said.
The United States intends to honor the agreement, subject to the results of the vetting processes that now apply to all refugees considered for admission to the United States of America. President Trump has made it clear that we'll honor the agreement. It doesn't mean we admire the agreement.
So they're not happy about it, Thomas. They don't love it, but they're going to go through with it. And again, I think what that signals is really how crucial Australia is as a partner for the United States in this region from a trade standpoint, but most importantly from a military, strategic, and security standpoint. One of the Five Eyes nations that cooperates on all kinds of secret classified